They say the lake remembers. I do not know if that is true, but I do know this. Water has a way of carrying echoes longer than wind. And that morning, before the first voice broke the stillness, the only thing I heard was the gentle slap of ripples against aged wood and the distant hum of dragonflies hovering over the reeds. I had my coffee in one hand and the steam curling up against my cheek. The sun had just started peeking over the eastern trees, brushing the surface of the lake with that kind of gold you cannot find in paint. It was a morning meant for quiet, a morning my wife, Elise, would have loved. The kind that made you forget the world had rules, or borders, or meetings about violations. The dock beneath my feet creaked like it always did. Not weakly, not in protest, just the sound of old timber doing what it was meant to do. She and I built it with our own hands, measured every plank, drove every nail. We never rushed. We let the seasons shape it with their weight. Rain, frost, sun. That dock held memories thicker than the fog that clung to the far end of the water. So, when I saw the sign, I thought, for one strange second, that it did not belong in my world. It was too loud, too new, too red. The stake had been driven deep into the soil just to the left of the dock. A rectangle of metal, clean and bold, screamed across the top in white block letters. Violation, unauthorized structure, subject to removal. The seal of the HOA sat neatly at the bottom, as if that alone made it final. I set my coffee down slowly on the edge post and stood there, not angry yet, just measuring. Measuring the space between peace and provocation. That was when I heard the footsteps, crunching gravel, confident. The kind of walk that comes with someone who believes they are not just right, but righteous. Pamela Crane stood at the top of the incline that led down to my cabin and dock. She wore her signature pastel cardigan peach today with a clipboard in hand, even though no one had asked her to record anything. Her blonde bob was sharp as ever, motionless despite the lake breeze, arms folded like a judge who had already reached a verdict. "This dock is not approved," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "It was never submitted for inspection or architectural review. According to Article 12, Section C of the Lakeshore Community Covenant, this area falls under Common Use Buffer Zone." She said it like it had been tattooed on the inside of her eyelids. I did not answer her. Not yet. She took a step closer, not enough to be on my land, but enough to cast her voice down with authority. "We will be reclaiming this space. You will receive formal notice. 7 days. Still, I said nothing. There are moments when silence is not absence. It is pressure. It is the space between a match and the flame. She held my gaze for a second too long, expecting me to push back. When I did not, her lips curled. Not quite a smile. More like satisfaction. And then she turned, heels pivoting neatly, and walked back toward the road. The crunch of her departure sounded almost rehearsed. I looked back at the sign. There was no courtesy note. No phone call, no inquiry, just the red badge of power planted in my yard like a flag in foreign soil. I did not touch it. Instead, I sat back down on the edge of the dock, picked up my coffee, watched the mist lift off the water like breath from a sleeping animal, and I thought of Elise. She would have laughed, not a loud laugh, but that soft, knowing chuckle that said, "They have no idea who they are dealing with, do they?" Because she remembered what this place was built on. See, Pamela thinks this dock is an act of rebellion. She thinks I dragged some boards out here and hammered them together last summer. But this dock, our dock, was here long before the HOA committee ever printed its first set of bylaws. I have the paper to prove it. The ink may be faded, the signatures a little smudged, but the shoreline has always been mine. Every foot, every curve, every rock and root. It was not part of the common area. It never had been. Just because no one else bothered to read the deed does not mean the deed disappeared. They came for a dock, but they did not realize I already owned the whole shoreline. I did not build the dock for war. I built it for her, long before red violation signs or spray-painted lines marked the edge of our world. There were just two people with tired hands, raw lumber, and a quiet promise. Elise and I had spent the better part of that summer, our last real summer, sinking posts into the soft mud, measuring joists, arguing over symmetry. She always insisted on straight lines. I liked a little imperfection. We were not young by then. Life had already scraped its lessons into our bones. But there was something almost childlike about the way we worked together on that dock. We laughed more than we measured. We took breaks just to sit on the planks and watch the sun float across the lake. It was not a project. It was a goodbye we did not know we were saying. When the accident took her the following spring, I could not bring myself to change anything. I left her gloves on the hook inside the shed. I left her tool belt hanging from the rafters. I even left the last screw she dropped in the corner beam. It is still there, a little rusted now, half sunk, but I can spot it every time I walk out barefoot and feel that slight tilt under my heel. People who visit this lake see trees, birds, water. I see memories nailed into cedar. After Elise passed, I stopped going into town unless I had to. The grocery clerk started using a softer voice around me. The librarian offered condolences every time I returned a book. It felt like everyone was waiting for me to collapse. Maybe I was, but not here. Not in the place she had helped me build. I moved out here full-time that fall, left the city behind, packed what was left of our shared life into boxes, and brought it all to this cabin. It is not much, just one story, open layout, cedar siding that smells like the inside of a pencil box when it rains. But it is mine, ours. I never joined the HOA. When the letter came shortly after I settled in, welcoming me to the lakeshore community, outlining the benefits of optional membership, I set it on the counter and never opened it again. I was not interested in potlucks or kayak races or voting on mailbox styles. I just wanted to be left alone, to heal in peace. But in this neighborhood, solitude is often mistaken for submission. Pamela Crane made that mistake early on. She knocked on my door once, about 2 years ago, asking if I would consider trimming the tree that hung slightly over the edge of the community path. I told her I would think about it. I never did. The branches stayed. After that, she stopped smiling when we passed each other at the mailbox cluster. It is always like that. When you do not attend the cookouts or wave at every passing SUV, people start assigning you adjectives you never chose. Cold, difficult, antisocial. And eventually, those words evolve into something worse, a problem. But the truth is, I am not a problem. I am just a man who built a quiet life beside a quiet lake, and did not think I needed permission to do so. The others in the community, they are polite. They nod from behind their manicured lawns, their matching Adirondack chairs, their trimmed hedges that never quite hide the tension behind their smiles. But no one really knows me, not since Elise. And that is how Pamela came to her conclusion. To her, I am the perfect target. A reclusive old man with gray hair and creaky joints, living at the far edge of the lake where no one would hear if the dock disappeared one night. I do not attend board meetings. I do not gossip at the marina. I do not own a golf cart or put little flags in my yard on the holidays. In the world of HOA politics, that makes me defenseless. She could not have been more wrong. What Pamela failed to understand, what she still does not understand, is that some men retreat not out of fear, but out of discipline. There is a difference between silence and surrender, and while I may not raise my voice in meetings or fire off angry emails, I know exactly where my lines are drawn, legally, emotionally, historically. I have spent my life in systems. As a mechanical engineer, I worked with machines that had no tolerance for ego. You followed the numbers. You trusted the design. If something failed, it was not because you yelled louder. It was because you missed a detail. That is the lens through which I see the world. That is the way I built this life. Pamela comes at problems with pressure, with showmanship. She uses meetings like weapons, rules like whips, bureaucracy like a battering ram. And I think that works for most people, but pressure does not work on stone. It works on sand. And I have been stoned since the day Elise left this earth. This dock may look like an eyesore to her, an unauthorized structure jutting into community water, but to me, it is the last place where I held her hand. The last place where she laughed with her legs dangling over the edge and told me I measured the beams wrong. It is the place where I have spent nearly every morning for the past 6 years, watching the sun rise over the pines and pretending I could still hear her breathing beside me. So, no, I will not be removing the dock. I do not care if the sign stays for now. I do not care if Pamela sends her inspectors or her painters or her petty citations. Because while she was memorizing Section 12 of the HOA bylaws, I was memorizing the parcel maps and land grants from when this lake was first charted. And when the time comes, I will show her the difference between owning power and knowing where it actually begins and ends. She thinks I am just some quiet old man at the edge of the lake. She's about to learn what quiet can do. Have you ever been judged just for keeping to yourself? It started with the sound of tires on gravel, slow, deliberate, not the usual whir of a neighbor's car heading to the marina, or the cheerful bounce of a kid's bike chain. This was heavier, measured, a kind of mechanical confidence that only ever meant one thing out here, someone arriving who had no intention of leaving quietly. I was on the porch, the same cup of coffee in hand, steam curling into the morning air, when the white utility truck crept around the bend. The HOA seal was stamped across the door in bright blue vinyl. 3 men sat inside, all wearing matching neon vests, their faces blank with the kind of apathy that comes from following orders written by someone who would never lift a hammer. They parked without a word and began unloading cones, measuring wheels, and 2 orange spray cans. Not traffic orange, not safety orange. This was a color designed to insult the earth. It screamed against the pine needles, against the wood grain, against the soft dirt at the edge of the water. The kind of orange that says, "We own this now." I stood, still barefoot, watching from the porch steps as they approached the dock without hesitation. No knock, no clipboard explanation, no courtesy. The first man pulled a roll of yellow tape from his vest and walked the perimeter, wrapping it around the posts like caution tape at a crime scene. Another knelt down near the eastern piling, shook the spray can, and began marking a jagged border where the dock met the land. I did not speak. Not because I was afraid, because I was calculating. Pamela Crane showed up 10 minutes later. She did not park in my driveway. She stopped at the edge of the private road, got out of her SUV Silver, polished, clean like her, and walked down the incline in flat shoes that somehow made her stride more intimidating. She carried nothing in her hands this time, not a clipboard, not a file folder, just herself, her expression, and the echo of authority she had carefully cultivated over years of unchecked power. She approached the dock and stood between me and the workers, her back to them, facing me with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Grant," she said, as if this were a social call. I did not respond. She glanced at the men behind her, then stepped to the side, allowing me a clear view of the scene. My dock, now circled in industrial tape and streaked with offensive color, like some forgotten structure condemned by a city no one asked to build. "As of today," she continued, "this dock is officially classified as an unauthorized structure. According to our revised architectural standards, anything extending more than 6 feet into shared lakefront space must be submitted for approval." She said, "revised," like it was a holy word. A small man in khaki slacks and a sweat-stained HOA polo appeared behind her and carefully climbed the stairs to my porch. He reached into a folder, peeled back a page, and pressed a bright pink notice onto the center of my cabin door. I watched it flutter slightly in the breeze before he smoothed it with his palm. Unauthorized construction, subject to removal. 7-day notice. Pamela's voice cut through the silence again. "If the dock is not removed within the week, we will take action to dismantle and dispose of it in accordance with community bylaws." She tilted her head slightly. "Of course, if you would prefer to file an appeal, we have procedures in place." I took a slow sip of coffee. It had gone cold, but I did not care. I held the cup tighter, my knuckles whitening just enough for her to notice. I wanted her to see it, not because I was about to yell, but because I was not. People like Pamela mistake silence for weakness. They think compliance is the same as surrender. But what they do not understand, what she could never grasp, is that some men are not wired for emotional theater. Some of us operate like the machines we once built, precise, quiet, and devastatingly efficient when activated. She waited for me to respond. When I did not, she gave a faint, satisfied nod, turned on her heel, and walked away, her shoes crunching across the gravel like punctuation marks. The workers finished spraying their marks and packed up their tools in silence. One of them glanced at me with something that looked a little like pity or maybe discomfort, but he said nothing. None of them did. By noon, the dock looked like a crime scene. Bright orange hash marks trailed across the beams. The tape fluttered against the breeze like flags hung for surrender. The fine notice on my door stared at me with bureaucratic arrogance, daring me to fight back in a language few people here knew how to speak. Paperwork, precedent, legal boundaries hidden between commas. I did not tear it down. I did not yell. I did not call anyone. Instead, I walked out to the edge of the dock and sat down just like I always did. The same 3. Floorboards, the same subtle tilt in the west corner, Elise never let me fix because she liked how the morning light hit it just right. I closed my eyes, breathed in the pine, let the weight of their arrogance settle against my shoulders like fog. The HOA believed this dock was theirs to dismantle, that it was just another structure built too far, claimed too much, disrespected their invisible fence lines. But this dock had roots. It was not just boards and bolts. It was grief made tangible. It was time carved into cedar. It was the quiet extension of a life built carefully, deliberately, far from their meeting rooms and motion votes. I did not build this dock for community approval. I built it for love, for memory, for peace. And now they had marked it for destruction. They thought they had made their move, but all they had done was place their queen too early on the board, bold, exposed, and underestimating the man watching from the opposite side. Let them paint it. Let them post their fines. The war had begun, and they were standing on the wrong shoreline. It is strange the things you remember. The way light used to filter through Elise's hair when she leaned over blueprints. The way her fingers would trace property lines on old maps. Not because she needed to, but because she liked to feel where things began and ended. She believed in boundaries, not the kind drawn by people like Pamela Crane, but the kind that carried history, the kind that meant something. She had a saying. She said it only once, but it never left me. If anything ever happens to me, protect this place like you'd protect me. At the time, I nodded, half listening, thinking we had all the time in the world. But time has a way of lying to you. That line came back to me the day after the orange spray dried. I had not touched the tape. I let it flap in the wind like a challenge, waiting to be answered in my own language. I am not a man who shouts, never have been. When Elise died, I did not scream. I fixed the sink. I rewired the hallway light she always complained about. I organized her books alphabetically and labeled every box. Grief to me has always been a filing cabinet, heavy, stubborn, full of things no one wants to open but cannot afford to throw away. That morning, I pulled down the old lockbox from the shelf above the closet. The metal was cold, dented at the corners. I had not opened it in years. Inside were the remnants of a former life. Land documents, title transfers, a photo of Elise standing barefoot on the dock frame with a hammer in her hand and sawdust on her jeans. There was a smell, too, aged paper and cedar oil, like the past refusing to be erased. I pulled out the deed, dated October 3rd, 1962, signed by a man named Ernest Blake. The original owner of the entire northern shoreline before the HOA was even an idea scribbled in a meeting room. The document was yellowed, the edges curled, but the ink was still strong. Exclusive, deeded ownership of lakefront parcel, beginning at boundary marker 18A through to marker 21, inclusive of all natural access points. I read it twice, then a third time. I traced the old county seal with my thumb and sat there for a long while, the kind of stillness where even the birds forget to sing. It was not just the dock, it was the land. The entire curve of shoreline Pamela now claimed as common access buffer zone. It had always belonged to the cabin, to Elise, to me. I spread the rest of the documents across the kitchen table. Parcel maps, tax assessments, a black and white photograph of the lake taken from a seaplane, annotated in red ink by some long-gone zoning officer. The shoreline was unmistakable, unbroken. Ours. I opened my laptop for the first time in days and began pulling satellite overlays, digging through digital archives, municipal land records, anything I could cross-reference against what I already had. I opened Google Earth and marked every dock, every boundary, every line drawn by hand or mouse in the past 70 years. And I began building my case, not in anger, but in certainty. This was not vengeance. This was alignment. Pamela Crane likely thought I had given up, that her orange spray and pink fines had scared the old man into retreat, that I was too frail, too tired, too detached to push back. She probably poured herself a glass of Chardonnay that night and celebrated her victory from a house she did not fully own, in a neighborhood she thought she governed. Let her think that. The most dangerous man in a conflict is not the one who yells. It is the one who listens while you underestimate him. I scanned the deed, uploaded the documents, took time-stamped screenshots of satellite imagery, highlighted inconsistencies in the HOA's recent boundary redrawings. I created folders. I labeled everything twice. I built a timeline, when the HOA was formed, when the rules changed, when they started encroaching. And I found gaps, legal ones. Turns out, their bylaws never accounted for parcels deeded before the association's formation. It was a loophole, not just a technicality, a doorway. Pamela had stepped into something she did not understand. She believed the dock was an act of defiance. She failed to realize it was an inheritance, a protected structure on privately deeded land, immune from retroactive enforcement. And I had the paper trail to prove it. I did not call a lawyer, not yet. This was not the time for noise. It was the time for stillness with weight, like the air before a thunderstorm. That afternoon, I returned to the dock, sat in the same place, hands clasped, the lockbox beside me. The orange lines were still there, fading slightly under the sun. But they no longer looked like threats. They looked like mistakes. Pamela's mistake was thinking the dock was just wooden nails, but it was a line, a very old line, and she had crossed it. I watched a family of ducks swim past the far reeds. I listened to the soft knocking of waves against the posts, and I remembered Elise's voice again, softer this time, like a memory whispering through pine needles. Protect this place like you'd protect me. I smiled, just a little, because I was not just going to protect it, I was going to make sure no one ever dared threaten it again. And I would not do it with raised voices or neighborhood petitions or angry lawn signs. I would do it with proof, with precision, with patience. Because not all rights are written in ink. Some are carved in silence. Do you believe silence can be more powerful than yelling? The envelope was plain. No color, no seal, no frills. Just my name and return address in the corner, printed neatly, no fanfare. I had considered sending it by email. Quicker, easier, but some things deserve the weight of paper. I wanted her to feel it when she opened it. I wanted her to hold the quiet in her hands. Inside were 6 pages. The first was a short cover letter, formal and measured. No emotion, just language she would understand. To the board of the Lakeshore Homeowners Association, I am writing in response to the citation posted on my residence regarding alleged unauthorized construction. Attached, please find legal documentation pertaining to my exclusive deeded ownership of the shoreline in question, dating back to October 3rd, 1962. I kept it simple. I referenced the deed, the original county maps, the exemption clause that predated the HOA itself. I included notarized copies. I even added a QR code linking to the satellite overlays I had annotated, just in case Pamela preferred modern formats. I signed it with a pen Elise once gave me, the ink just beginning to fade. Then I walked it to the HOA drop box near the clubhouse. The walk itself felt like a message. I could have driven, could have mailed it. But there was something fitting about showing up on foot, envelope in hand, moving slowly past the trimmed hedges and chemically green lawns of those who believed silence meant surrender. A few neighbors watched from porches or behind windows. No one waved, no one smiled, but they saw me. That was enough. I dropped the letter in the slot, and I turned back toward the lake. By the time I returned home, the wind had picked up slightly, rustling the tape that still clung to the edges of my dock. It reminded me of a weak signal trying to broadcast authority, but barely hanging on. I grabbed my hammer, a short wooden post, and a rectangular plank I had sanded the night before. In clean block letters I had burned into the wood, using Elise's old pyrography tool. The sign read, private shoreline, access by owner only. I drove it into the ground at the edge of the dock, just enough angle to face the water, just enough height to be seen from the road. Not aggressive, just final. Then I unpacked the cameras. They were not fancy, just simple motion-triggered sensors with wide lenses and quiet patience. I mounted one at the edge of the porch beam, another inside the woodshed, angled toward the dock. A third I placed beneath the overhang near the eastern property marker. They would not deter anything violent. That was not the point. They were observers, silent witnesses. I had learned over the years that people behave differently when they know someone is watching. And I was watching now. 3 hours later, I heard a car pull up. It was Pamela. She had not come with a group this time. No survey crew, no clipboard carriers, no HOA interns eager to impress. Just her, in her usual silver SUV, pulling halfway into the gravel turnaround, parking as if unsure whether she had the right to be there. I stayed seated on the porch, did not rise, just watched. She got out slowly. She wore a crisp blue blouse, one that matched the HOA's logo colors, and flats that sank a little into the dirt as she approached. Her eyes scanned the dock. The tape was gone now, peeled off, not torn. I had removed it carefully, as if returning something that had been borrowed without permission. Her gaze stopped at the new sign. She frowned, just slightly, enough to show the first visible crack in her mask. Then her eyes lifted to the cameras. She took a small step back, almost involuntarily. I stood. She straightened her posture, recovering quickly. "I saw your letter," she said. I nodded once. Her voice softened just a touch. "I think there may be confusion about the boundary lines. We may need to reassess where there is no confusion," I said, calm and clear. "You have the documents now?" She paused. I watched her fight for footing. In her world, power was maintained through pressure memos, meetings, minor threats. But real ownership is heavier. It lives in deeds and signatures and county stamps. No HOA rewrite can erase. Pamela tried again. "The board may request a formal review of your claim." "You are welcome to," I said. "The documents are public record. The shoreline is deeded, always has been." She blinked. The wind moved her hair slightly across her cheek, and for the first time, she looked unsure. Just for a second. Then it was gone. She adjusted her sleeve. "We will be in touch." I did not respond. She turned, returned to her car, and drove away slower than she had arrived. I stood there for a while, listening to the gravel settle in her absence. Then I walked back to the dock, sat down again. Same 3 floorboards, same quiet tilt. The lake was still. The cameras blinked silently behind me. I had made my first move, not with force, not with confrontation, with proof, with clarity, with the quiet strength of a man who had been underestimated for far too long. Let them send more letters, let them hold another meeting. I had drawn my line, and this time it would not be erased. They say the devil is in the details, but they are wrong. The devil is in the assumptions. And for Pamela Crane and the Lakeshore HOA, the greatest assumption they made was that no one would ever bother to look deeper. Not into the records, not into the maps, certainly not into the digital shadows of a shoreline they had been claiming as their own for more than a decade. But I did. It started with a scan. I fed the original deed, the one signed in the 1962, into my flatbed scanner and saved it as a high-resolution PDF. I cleaned up the contrast, sharpened the lettering, and highlighted the parcel ID in pale yellow. Then I downloaded every available map I could find from the county assessor's website. Topographic surveys, zoning overlays, shoreline development reports. Even a planning commission's memo from 2 decades ago that mentioned potential dock regulations. I was not just building a folder, I was constructing a weapon made entirely out of paper. The next step was software. I opened my old CAD program, still installed on the laptop I used before retirement, buried behind a layer of dust and half-archived emails from my consulting days. It booted slowly but faithfully, like me. I uploaded the base layer, the original parcel map from 1962. Then I layered it with the current GIS data exported from the county's open records portal. I aligned the markers manually, pinpointing every survey node, every corner boundary, every dock and setback line. The discrepancy appeared almost immediately. It was not subtle. The HOA's version of the shoreline boundary, used in their most recent enforcement zone map, cut straight through the middle of my deeded parcel. According to their documents, the public buffer zone began nearly 20 feet inside my legally owned land. 20 feet. That was not a rounding error. That was theft. Quiet, bureaucratic, and very deliberate. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the layered maps on the screen. It was almost beautiful, the way it all lined up. How the newer maps tried to overwrite the old like paint over dry rot. But they had forgotten the bones underneath. They had forgotten that records, no matter how dusty, still had weight. I began annotating, drawing red boxes around every shift in boundary placement, highlighting the line where the HOA's maps diverged from the legally recorded deed. I inserted call-out notes, added time stamps, color-coded every year that the discrepancy widened, and exported the entire timeline as a full-color print file. Then I gave it a name. Chronology of Deeded Shoreline Ownership, Parcel 18, A to 21. I printed 4 copies at the office supply store in town, had them bound in clear plastic covers with black spiral spines. They looked like the kind of reports you find in a county office, the kind that get passed around meetings and make the room go quiet. I kept one for myself, slid it onto the table beside the lockbox where the old paper records still lived like artifacts. The second copy I mailed, certified, signature required, to the HOA's registered address. The third, hand-delivered to the county zoning office. The fourth, that one I left inside the clubhouse library, tucked between a stack of outdated HOA newsletters and a cookbook someone had donated years ago. I did not label it. I just placed it there and walked out, knowing someone would find it. And they did. The whispers started 2 days later. It began with sideways glances from neighbors who used to avoid eye contact. A wave here, a nod there. Small shifts in posture as I walked by. The kind of change that happens when people realize the story they were told might not be the truth. Then came the knock. I was on the porch, sanding the edge of a garden bench Elise had started years ago, but never finished. The wood was soft from rain, but salvageable. I heard the knock at the front door. Hesitant, polite. Not the kind Pamela would make. I opened it to find Doug Lively, clipboard in hand, sweat beading along his hairline. Doug had always been the quiet one on the board, younger than the rest, with soft eyes and a nervous laugh. He usually sat at the far end of the table during HOA meetings, nodding, but rarely speaking. I had always figured he was there for the resume padding. "Mr. I Grant," he said, I read the report." He held up the bound copy, pages slightly curled from the summer air. I had no idea the deed went that far back, or that the boundary line was that off. "It is not off," I said calmly. "It is wrong." He nodded slowly. "I asked Pamela about it," he added. "She said you were misinterpreting the documents. But I went to the assessor's office. They confirmed your parcel extends to the full shoreline, pre-HOA incorporation." I waited. Doug shifted on his feet. "Listen, I do not want trouble, but I also do not want to sit in meetings and pretend none of this matters." "It matters," I said. "It has always mattered." "They just thought no one would notice." Doug swallowed hard. "Would you mind if I asked you a few questions off the record?" I stepped aside and motioned him in. We sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by maps, deeds, screenshots, and the quiet hum of truth finally breathing. He listened, really listened. He asked about the dock, about the cameras, about the process of overlaying maps and how I discovered the line drift over time. He took notes, careful ones. His pen moved like he was writing something that would be read by others. When he left, he shook my hand. No hesitation, no avoidance, just a firm grip and a quiet thank you. Pamela had started a war with a man she thought could not read a map. Now one of her own was holding the proof she refused to see. And the lake? The lake was watching. So were the people. The silence around me was beginning to shift, not into noise, but into attention. The kind that carries weight, the kind that changes things before a word is ever spoken. Because sometimes the most powerful move is not confrontation. Sometimes it is the quiet. Truth presented so clearly that denial becomes impossible. They had drawn their maps, but they had forgotten to read mine. Thin white envelopes slipped between the wooden slats of my front porch railing, as if Pamela thought the wind might carry it away before I had a chance to open it. Lakeshore, HOA, special session. Notice subject, community discussion, dock usage and shoreline access. Time, Thursday 7 p.m. Location, clubhouse meeting room. Agenda, review of parcel. 18. A. Proposal to convert non-compliant dock into shared community amenity. No mention of me. No mention of my deed. No acknowledgement that the dock in question was legally constructed on land I had owned longer than the HOA itself had existed. They wanted to reframe the narrative, not as a violation now, but as an opportunity, a shared amenity, a place for neighbors to gather, as Pamela would no doubt phrase it, smoothing over theft with smiles and lavender-scented diplomacy. It was not enough to mark the dock as illegal. Now she wanted to rewrite history. I spent the afternoon packing my case, not in folders, not in flash drives, but in weight, the kind that cannot be ignored when it lands on a table. I rolled up the large-scale parcel overlays I had printed at the county office, full-scale maps, color-coded, time-stamped. I slid them into a thick cardboard tube. Then I packed the binder. It was black, dense, unmarked on the outside. Inside, it held every piece of documentation I had assembled: deed lineage, land transfers, zoning maps, surveyor field notes, aerial overlays, legal exemptions, enforcement timelines, and a full list of HOA violations by date, complete with side-by-side clauses showing which had been overreaches. I did not include commentary. The facts were loud enough. By 6:45, I was dressed in a clean button-down shirt, sleeves rolled once, and standing in front of the clubhouse. A large American flag flapped lazily in the evening breeze beside the brick entryway. Through the glass doors, I could see the long meeting table surrounded by folding chairs, most already filled. Pamela stood near the head of the room, smiling. Her hair was pulled tighter than usual, her pastel blazer almost the color of her HOA fines, somewhere between coral and threat. She held a stack of papers and a pen she spun in practice circles between her fingers. I stepped inside. The room went quiet, not frozen, but recalibrated. People who had never looked at me twice now shifted in their seats. Some nodded. One woman, bless her, actually smiled. I walked to the end of the table, unscrewed the cap of the blueprint tube, and set it down with a calm thud. Then I placed the binder beside it, open to the title page, Chronology of Deeded Shoreline Ownership, Parcel 18. I did not sit. Pamela cleared her throat. "Mr. Grant," she said with a smile she had clearly rehearsed, "thank you for joining us. We were just about to begin." She turned to the group. As many of you know, the Lakeshore HOA has recently conducted a review of shoreline structures to ensure compliance with our shared space guidelines. One structure, located at the edge of Parcel 18A, has raised questions regarding usage, boundaries, and long-term community access. She paused for effect. In light of these discussions, I am proposing that the dock in question be converted into a shared community amenity available to all residents for fishing, sunbathing, launching kayaks, and seasonal events. She gestured to a glossy rendering projected on a screen behind her. An idealized version of my dock, complete with benches, flower pots, and a rack of HOA-labeled life jackets. The room murmured. Then I stepped forward. "I would like to speak." Pamela hesitated, then nodded. I opened the binder and began. This parcel, 18A through 21, is deeded land, recorded October 3rd, 1962. Pre-HOA. The dock sits entirely within the property line outlined in that original deed. I laid out the blueprints, the overlays, the maps. I pointed to boundary markers, cornerstones, GIS pins, and zoning memos that supported every claim. I referenced HOA Clause 12, Section C, and its own exception paragraph regarding grandfathered shoreline structures. I showed them the timeline, the encroachment, the map revisions, the false citations. I said nothing about feelings, only facts. Pamela tried to interrupt twice, but each time I responded by turning a page. And the paper, cool, weighty, undeniable, spoke louder than either of us. When I was finished, I closed the binder and stepped back. Silence. Then, a voice from the far end of the table. I cannot vote for a motion that contradicts legal ownership. It was Doug Lively. He sat straight, eyes fixed on Pamela, his voice firmer than I had ever heard it. This is not about sharing a dock, he continued. It is about whether or not we have the authority to take something that clearly does not belong to us. Pamela tried to smile again, but it faltered. There is precedent for HOA intervention in. Not here, Doug said. Not with this. We were wrong. Another board member shifted uncomfortably. The rest of the room followed suit. Pamela glanced around, realizing she no longer held the center of gravity in the room. She adjusted her blazer, shuffled her papers, and changed the subject to summer barbecue scheduling. The vote never happened. The dock remained untouched. I left the binder on the table. Let them study it. Let them sit with it. Let the weight of the truth rest heavy where denial used to live. Outside, the lake was glass still, reflecting the dusky blue of early evening. I walked home slowly, blueprint tube under my arm, passing houses that had never waved until tonight. A few did. Small waves, quiet acknowledgments. Not celebration. Not yet. But something had changed. Pamela had used power like a weapon. I had used paper, like a scalpel, and I had carved out the truth. Have you ever used knowledge or documentation to defend yourself against power? There is a special kind of silence that settles over you when you think you are about to lose. It is not loud or panicked. It is slow, heavy. Like the air around you is learning to live without motion. That is the silence I felt when I opened the envelope and saw the name Pamela Crane printed above a law firm logo. She had filed a formal legal complaint, not a neighborhood fine this time, not a warning sign hammered into the dirt or a committee memo with polite wording and pastel margins. This was a stamped, certified document, thick with citations, aggressive in tone, clinical in intent. The words hit like cold steel. Intentional obstruction of HOA authority, disruption of community order, attempted exemption from established covenant compliance. The document concluded with a demand, immediate removal of the dock and surrender of shoreline access to the HOA under emergency board ruling. This was no longer about bylaws. This was about erasure. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter in front of me, the coffee beside it long gone cold. The binder I had filled with evidence felt too thin now, too fragile, too full of logic in a battle no longer ruled by it. Pamela had escalated, and in doing so, she had crossed a line not drawn in ink, but in earth, water, and time. I did not pace. I did not curse. I did what I have always done. I opened a file drawer, and I found what she had missed. Tucked near the back of a folder marked Archived, pre-HOA, I pulled out an old document printed on parchment-style paper. It had once belonged to Ernest Blake, the man who sold me the property. It was a supplemental clause added during a 1985 zoning clarification, notarized and sealed in blue ink by the county recorder's office. Dock structures are permanent if affixed to deeded waterfront property, constructed prior to HOA incorporation, and maintain a direct line to original parcel ownership. The clause was not ambiguous, it was precise. The dock was permanent, not subject to community review, not removable by board vote, not public, not shared, not theirs, mine. Alongside it, I included the county land use ruling I had requested weeks earlier, an official letterhead statement affirming that Parcel 18A through 21 was legally excluded from HOA shoreline jurisdiction due to deed lineage and lack of easement transfer. I made copies, 3 of them. Then I walked back to the HOA drop box, slid the envelope in gently, like returning a borrowed book someone had claimed was theirs. The next meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I did not plan to attend. But when the day arrived, something inside me shifted, not out of vengeance, not even pride, just responsibility. Elise would have gone. She would have worn that navy blue dress with the pockets and taken notes with a pen that always ran out halfway. So I showed up. For her. The room was fuller than before. Word had gotten around. The pamphlets, the binder, the maps. They had moved through the neighborhood like quiet fire. A few people nodded as I walked in. Doug Lively was already seated at the far end of the table, flipping through a stack of legal printouts. Pamela stood at the front. She was dressed in white this time, like someone attending a ceremony she hoped would cleanse what had come before. Her voice trembled slightly as she began. "We have received clarification from the county," she said, not looking at me. "In light of recently submitted documentation, the board has reviewed its position regarding Parcel 18A and the associated dock structure." She paused, her throat visibly tight. "The HOA will be retracting its prior enforcement notice." Silence. Not even the hum of the air conditioner. Then she added, "An official written apology will be circulated to all residents by the end of the week." Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Finally." Pamela's eyes scanned the room, but they did not meet mine. She closed her folder slowly. Her hands, usually crisp and controlled, fumbled slightly with the clasp. Then she stepped back, away from the podium, and took a seat at the far end of the table, pale, silent, folded into herself like a page being turned. The meeting ended without further argument. Outside, the sun had started to set. The lake shimmered beneath it, orange fading into blue, lines carved in water that no one could redraw. I walked home slowly. The dock was still there, untouched, quiet, whole. I sat at the edge again. Same 3 floorboards, same breeze, same tilt Elise used to tease me about. And I thought about boundaries, how some are made of wood and steel, but others are older. Older than HOAs, older than paperwork, older even than grief. Some boundaries are made of memory, and those are the ones that last. Pamela came to take my dock, but she learned that you cannot seize something built on more than property lines. You cannot erase what was never yours to rewrite, not when it is carved in silence, carved in love, carved in water. Have you ever had to deliver your final blow, not with anger, but with the kind of proof that speaks louder than rage? The dock is still here. It stands like it always has, weathered, sure-footed, reaching into the lake with the quiet confidence of something built by hand and memory. But something is different now, not in the dock itself, in the air around it, in the way the breeze moves without resistance, in the way silence no longer feels like warning, but arrival. A small plaque rests at the edge now, affixed just beneath the bench Eliza and I built together. I carved it myself with the same wood-burning tool she once used to label our gardening boxes. In memory of Elise, her hands built this. Neighbors pass by more often now. Some slow down when they walk the shoreline. A few stop, entirely, eyes lingering on the sign, their expressions soft, unreadable. No one says much, but no one dares touch it. A group of homeowners, a quiet, thoughtful people I had barely exchanged more than a nod with over the years, started a petition last week, a proposal to revise the HOA charter and limit its authority over privately deeded shoreline parcels. Not because they wanted to pick a fight, they told me, but because they saw what nearly happened and they did not want it happening again. I signed it, of course. Pamela did not. But she did resign. There was no announcement, no farewell letter typed in careful fonts and folded into community mailboxes. Just a single line in the next board meeting notes. Pamela Crane has submitted her resignation effective immediately. No one asked why. No one needed to. The lake has returned to itself. That is the only way I can describe it. The tape is gone. The signs are gone. The spray paint faded with the last storm and never came back. The water is quiet again. Some mornings, I bring my coffee to the dock, just like I always have. I sit where Elise used to sit, where the light falls longest across the wood, and I watch the sun touch the water like it is remembering. And maybe it is. Maybe places do remember, not in words, not the way we do, but in texture, in pressure. in the way footprints return to the same patches of soil and boards creak differently under certain kinds of weight. I do not sit there out of grief anymore. I sit there because it is home, because it is still ours, and because no one, not a committee, not a title, not a woman in a blazer with a clipboard, can ever take that from me again. I fought, not loudly, not cruelly, but thoroughly, and I won. Not just the right to keep a dock, but the right to protect what was already mine, what was always mine. Have you ever had to fight just to hold on to something that already belonged to you?